Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shills, destabilizers, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks. I'm a useful idiot. Welcome. And today I want to do something kind of unusual. And it's not drink a cup of coffee. That's highly usual for me. No, the unusual thing I'm going to do is discuss a question posed in a video I watched. And the question is, why would an American sympathize with Russia, particularly over the situation in Ukraine? I thought that was, a fairly legitimate question, and more importantly, I thought I could probably answer, but it would take creating a model, and that's what I've done. Creating a model to just demonstrate objectively what position Russia is in right now, and that will help explain why, in this scenario, I, for one, sympathize with Russia, just historically and objectively. And I wish I could say that the United States is the good guy in these scenarios. I really do. But unfortunately, the facts do not bear that out. So let's get to my discussion, and that is basically to switch the roles and discuss the idea of not the United States or Russia intervening in Ukraine, but the United States and Russia intervening in Mexico. And it makes a good comparison because Mexico is right on the U.S. border and certainly within the legitimate interests of the United States. And Ukraine is on the border of Russia and was a part of Russia for 800 years, and therefore makes a legitimate interest of Russia's. So let's get right down to this, because this could take a little bit. So the basic premise is, let's say that Mexico had been part of the United States for the last 400 years when this area and continent was colonized. And only in the last 20 years did Mexico become independent from the United States. And then let's say that in northern Mexico, most of the citizens are former U.S. citizens and English-speaking, and were there, and many Americans were still commuting back and forth to work in northern Mexico. And then let's also say that North Mexico has aspirations to rejoin the United States, particularly as Mexico leans to foreign interests. And then let's also remember that Russia, of course, is thousands of miles away from Mexico and would seem to have little legitimate interest in Mexico other than in an effort for Russia to undermine the United States by intervening and destabilizing Mexico just south of the United States border. And then just to take it one step further, let's suggest that the United States Pacific Fleet it was stationed in Baja, even though the U.S. had only given Baja to Mexico in the 1950s. And obviously I'm making a reference to Crimea, but let's just say that the U.S. Pacific Fleet had been stationed in Baja for all those 400 years, and that only recently had Baja, in the last 50 years, had Baja been given to Mexico. But the United States Pacific Fleet is still stationed there in a special arrangement. So then let's go to the next step, discussing Mexico and Russia and the United States relationship to it as compared to the situation in Ukraine. So let's say over the last several years that Russia had been funding and organizing opposition groups in Mexico, spending over $2 billion or so. And then let's also say that Russia has been wooing Mexico away from the U.S. economic circle, and that Mexican oil imports and pipelines were being threatened. And in fact, U.S. export of natural gas through Mexico to Latin America was threatened. So it seems like the United States would have some interest in Mexico, and people would be wondering why Russia has any interest in Mexico other than destabilizing it as a threat to the United States. And then let's say that Russia, through the China Development Bank, had set up massive bailouts for Mexico and had helped to instigate a program of austerity and therefore economic slavery. Let's remember also that Mexico's government is corrupt and run by Mexico's drug cartels and is a failed state. And ironically, that part of my scenario is actually rather accurate. Mexico's government and police and military are all infiltrated by the Mexican drug cartels, and this, of course, is a correlation with all the neo-Nazis and corruption that we find in Ukraine. And then, just as we have in Ukraine, we have oligarchs running the country. In Mexico, we have Mexican cartels and drug gangs that run the country in much the same way. And that's also where all the money is. And then let's say that finally that, of course, we end up seeing Russia supporting a coup in Mexico, and then Russia end up handpicking cartel members, drug cartel members, and Russian citizens to lead the government in Mexico. And then we find the U.S. annexes Baja, home of the Pacific U.S. Fleet. They annex that back in the face of this Russian threat. And then the U.S. Also annexes Cuba just to protect it from further Russian expansion. And then the U.S., of course, would turn around and supply and support weapons to the North Mexicans, the English-speaking former U.S. citizens who inhabit North Mexico, particularly in light of this Russian effort and infiltration in order to destabilize Mexico and turn it against the United States. And so both Russia and Mexico bring in more mercenaries to help fight this proxy war, and many volunteers from the United States, including U.S. military, show up in North America. That wouldn't be surprising at all, would it? To have a lot of volunteers and in the United States ending up putting U.S. soldiers surreptitiously in northern Mexico to fight these government, Mexican puppet government set up by the Russians in southern Mexico. And of course, we would support the separatist movement in North Mexico and its wishes to perhaps someday reunite with the United States and our own form of government. And then in the scenario too, let's just say for shits and giggles that a Latin American plane heading to Canada gets shot down. So in this scenario, with Russia infiltrating Mexico and the United States' interests in that region, and a Latin American plane gets shot down heading to Canada, who do you think would have a motive to do so? Would you think it was the Russian-supported rebels in southern Mexico? Would you think it would be the North Mexico separatists who are ostensibly U.S. citizens? Or do you think it would be the United States that would have shot that airplane down? Just food for thought, comparing it to the situation in the Ukraine. And then lastly, let's a couple more comparisons are that Mexico's corrupt government is now selling Mexico's assets to Russian and Chinese bankers and investors in a fire sale as Chinese and Russian interests strip Mexico clean of its assets in this vacuum. And then we also hear constant reports in Russian media of U.S. aggression in Mexico and claims by Russia and Mexico that the U.S. has moved huge invasion columns inside America, inside North Mexico. And of course, in that scenario, a lot of people would think that the United States would be justified in having huge invasion columns in North Mexico in a scenario that I've just painted. But one also would look at that situation and say, interesting that the U.S. did not intervene in North Mexico in this scenario. They seem to show admirable restraint under the situation, in considering what's going on in Mexico. So there's my little scenario comparing what if Russia had intervened in Mexico in much the same way that the United States has intervened in the Ukraine, and then looking at the Russian reaction to what happened in the Ukraine compared to what a comparable United States reaction would be to an intervention in Mexico. So just an exercise in being objective and finding out why would anyone want to sympathize with Russia in this situation over the Ukraine. I hope this was at least entertaining for some of you. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.